The marketplace was crowded with voices, shouts, and laughter. Traders called out their prices, buyers pushed through the crowd, and the smell of smoke and dust filled the air. At the center of the square stood a tall wooden stage. On that stage were cages, each holding frightened creatures who had been captured, beaten, or sold by their own people. The auctioneer moved from one cage to another, shouting numbers, waving his arms, calling for bids. Every time someone bought a slave, the crowd cheered. It was a cruel show, and people enjoyed it. At the far end of the line, in the smallest cage, sat a girl. She was different from the rest. Her body was thin and fragile, her skin pale, her size no larger than a human child, though she was older. She had big eyes that shined with fear. She pressed herself against the bars as the auctioneer grabbed her arm and yanked her forward. The crowd burst into laughter. "This one!" the auctioneer shouted. "A rare little thing, small, weak, and maybe useless, but rare. Who will take her?" The crowd howled with laughter. Some shouted jokes, others mocked her. "She's no better than a broken toy," someone yelled. Another voice joined. "I wouldn't pay a single scrap for her." The girl's face turned red as she pulled back, trying to hide behind her hands. The auctioneer grinned, enjoying the cruelty, and called out the starting price. No one raised a hand, not even one. The auctioneer frowned and lowered the number. "Come on, look at her. Tiny, easy to control, perfect for a servant. Who wants her?" Still, no one moved. More laughter broke out. "Why waste money on that?" another voice shouted. "She will starve before she carries a bucket of water." The auctioneer lowered the price again. His voice grew sharper, angrier, but the crowd kept mocking. The girl could hear every word. Each laugh cut into her chest. She wanted the ground to open and swallow her whole. She had no pride left, only fear and shame. She thought no one would ever want her. She would be thrown away like garbage. Then, in the back of the crowd, a single hand rose. The laughter stopped for a moment. The auctioneer froze, his eyes narrowing. Slowly, people turned to see who had done it. Standing there was a human man, tall, plain, dressed in worn clothes. His face was calm, his hands steady in the air. The silence lasted only a second before the laughter exploded louder than before. "A human?" someone shouted. "He wants the useless one?" Another voice mocked. "Maybe he collects trash." Others clapped and cheered in cruel joy, turning the auction into a game. But the man's hand did not move. He kept it raised, his eyes fixed on the cage. The auctioneer smirked, thinking he could use this moment. Fine. We have one fool who sees value. Do I hear another bid?" His voice carried over the crowd, but no one answered. They were too busy laughing at the human. The girl's heart raced. She did not understand. Why would a human choose her? Why not someone stronger, healthier, more useful? She watched him carefully, expecting him to lower his hand, to change his mind once the crowd's laughter grew too loud. But he didn't. The auctioneer, annoyed, called again. "Going once? Going twice?" He slammed his staff against the ground. "Sold!" The crowd cheered, mocking the human even more. "He paid for nothing!" someone shouted. "She'll break before the week is over." The cage door creaked open. The girl shrank back, expecting a rough hand to drag her out like always. But instead, the human stepped forward slowly, crouched down, and extended his arm. His hand was open, calm, not grabbing, not forcing. She hesitated, trembling, her wide eyes locked on him. When she did not move, he reached carefully and lifted her outward, his arms gentle, as if holding something fragile. She stiffened, expecting pain. None came. His grip was firm but safe. For the first time in her life, she felt warmth instead of chains. The crowd booed and laughed again, shouting jokes as the human carried her down the stage. But he never looked at them. He didn't answer their words. His eyes stayed forward, his steps steady. The girl kept staring at his face, searching for answers. Who was he? Why had he done this? Was it another trick, another form of cruelty she didn't understand yet? She wanted to ask, but her voice failed her. As the human walked out of the marketplace, the auctioneer laughed loudly behind them. "Good luck, human. You just bought the most useless thing in the galaxy." The laughter followed them down the road, but the human never slowed, never turned back. His hand had gone up once, and he had never lowered it until she was his. The girl held onto his sleeve with shaking fingers, not knowing why she did it. Something inside her whispered that this moment was different, that this choice meant something. The sound of laughter grew distant behind them, but in her heart, A small flame of hope began to burn. She could not explain it, but she knew one thing for certain. The human's hand had stayed in the air when no one else cared. And that small act felt like the start of something she had never believed in before. The human carried the small alien girl in his arms while the crowd's laughter chased him through the dusty street. People pointed at him, some shaking their heads, some mocking, others spitting on the ground as he passed. "Foolish human," someone sneered. "He paid for nothing." Another shouted, "Better feed her to the dogs." The noise rolled over him like a storm, but he walked on as if he couldn't hear a single word. The girl clung to his sleeve, her small hands trembling. Her heart pounded with fear. She kept waiting for him to throw her aside once the mocking grew too much. That was what always happened. People laughed, insulted, and then tossed her away like she was worthless. But this time was different. He didn't stop. He didn't let go. When they reached the edge of the square, the auctioneer shouted one last cruel joke from behind. "She'll die before sunrise. Don't come crying back when she's gone." The crowd roared with laughter again, but the human never turned his head. His grip only tightened around her, not in cruelty, but in silent promise. He walked until the noise faded. The girl dared to look up at his face. His eyes were not angry, not mocking, not filled with greed like the others she had seen before. They were calm, steady, and strangely warm. She tried to speak, but her throat closed. No words came out. She only lowered her head again and stayed silent. The road stretched long and empty. Dust swirled in the wind. Finally, the human stopped under a small shade of stone and gently set her down. She stood on shaky legs, afraid to meet his eyes. He reached into his pack, pulled out a small flask, and offered it to her. "Drink," he said softly. Her fingers shook as she took it. The water was cool, and the taste shocked her tongue. It was not bitter, not dirty, but clean. Her eyes widened as she drank in hurried gulps until she coughed. He took the flask back, not scolding her, just waiting until her breathing slowed. "Why?" she whispered finally, her voice faint. "Why me?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the road, then back at her. Because no one else would. His words sank deep into her chest. She didn't know if she believed him. She had been told all her life she was useless, too small, too weak, but he had lifted his hand when no one else did, and he hadn't lowered it until she was his. They walked again, side by side this time. She followed closely, glancing around, afraid others would come to take her away. Some people stared at them, whispering, but none stepped forward. His tall figure seemed to push the world aside with every step. Soon, they reached a quiet place beyond the crowded streets. A small house stood alone, built from rough stone and old wood. It looked simple, worn, but strong. The human opened the door and gestured for her to enter. She hesitated, her bare feet hovering at the threshold. She had never been inside a place without chains or guards. He didn't push her. He only waited until she stepped in slowly. The air smelled of firewood and metal. The room was small, with a table, a bed, and shelves filled with tools. It wasn't rich or grand, but it felt safe. The human set down his pack, then handed her a piece of bread. She stared at it, unsure if it was a trick. "Eat," he said. His tone was plain, not forcing, not mocking. She bit into it carefully. The taste was rough but real, filling her stomach in a way she had almost forgotten. Tears stung her eyes. She turned her face so he wouldn't see. That night, he gave her a blanket and pointed to a small corner near the fire. "You can rest here." His voice was firm, but not unkind. She curled into the blanket, hugging it tightly. It was the first time in years she had been given warmth instead of cold iron bars. The human sat at the table, sharpening a tool in silence. His movements were steady, the sound of stone scraping metal filling the room. She watched him from the corner, her heart confused. He had not asked her to work, had not beaten her, had not laughed at her. Instead, he had given her food, water, and a place to rest. Her thoughts twisted in her head. Was this another trick? Would he sell her tomorrow? Would he tire of her weakness and send her back? Yet when she closed her eyes, she remembered his hand in the air, steady, unshaken, while everyone else laughed. That picture burned bright in her mind. Sleep pulled at her, and for the first time, she dreamed. Not of cages or chains, not of laughter and shame, but of a world where someone looked at her without disgust. A world where she was not alone. The human glanced at her before putting out the lamp. In the dark room, the sound of her soft breathing mixed with the crackle of the fire. Outside, the colony still mocked him, still whispered about the fool who bought the worthless one. But inside that house, something different began to grow, something fragile, like a seed buried in hard ground. She didn't know it yet, but the moment his hand stayed raised in the marketplace had already changed her life forever. The sun rose slowly over the alien colony, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The streets were already busy with merchants and workers, their voices loud as they prepared for another day. Inside the small stone house at the edge of town, the tiny alien girl opened her eyes. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She expected to see iron bars, a locked cage, and cruel faces staring at her. But instead, she saw a roof made of wood, shelves filled with tools, and the warmth of a fire still glowing in the hearth. She lay very still, clutching the blanket tightly around her small body. The human was already awake, sitting at the table, repairing a broken tool with calm focus. His hands were strong and steady, moving with patience. She watched him quietly, afraid to make a sound. When he noticed her eyes open, he didn't shout or command her. He only nodded once, as if to say, "You're safe." He pushed a wooden plate across the table with a piece of bread and a small bowl of soup. "Eat," he said simply. His voice was firm but not harsh. She hesitated, her stomach growling with hunger, before moving slowly to the table. She took tiny bites at first, expecting the food to be taken away. But he didn't stop her. He just returned to his work, letting her eat in peace. The warmth of the soup spread through her body, and tears filled her eyes again. She wiped them quickly, not wanting him to see. In her life, kindness had always been a trick. But this felt different. He didn't laugh, didn't mock, didn't demand anything in return. After the meal, he stood and took a cloak from the wall. "Come," he said. She froze, her heart racing. Did he mean to sell her again? Was this just another stop on her long trail of shame? Her legs trembled as she followed him out the door. The road stretched ahead, quiet except for the sound of his heavy boots and her bare feet brushing the dirt. She stayed close behind him, her eyes darting left and right at the passers-by. People stared at them, whispering as they walked. "That's her," someone muttered. "The worthless one." Another voice laughed. "And he still keeps her? Fool." The girl lowered her head, ashamed, but the human walked on, silent, ignoring every word. Soon the crowded streets gave way to open land. Fields of dry grass bent in the wind, and small hills rose in the distance. The girl lifted her head slowly, surprised at the emptiness around them. It was wide, open, and free. She had never seen such space without walls. They walked until they reached a small workshop built into the side of a hill. The human pushed open the door and motioned for her to enter. Inside, the air smelled of metal, wood, and oil. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Half-built machines rested on tables, and the sound of wind rattled the roof. The girl's eyes widened. She had lived in cages, dark corners, and dirty pens. She had never stepped into a place filled with creation instead of destruction. The human set down his pack and began to sort through pieces of metal. Without looking up, he said, "If you stay, you'll help here." Her heart skipped. Help? No one had ever asked her to help. People had only used her, beaten her, or laughed at her. She opened her mouth, unsure how to answer, but no words came. He didn't press her. He simply began to work, hammering a piece of steel into shape. For hours, he worked while she stood quietly in a corner. She watched him bend, hammer, and polish the metal until it gleamed. Every strike of his hammer seemed to echo in her chest. There was strength in him, but it wasn't cruel strength. It was steady, patient, and controlled. At one point, he handed her a small cloth and nodded toward the table. "Wipe," he said. Her hands shook as she reached for the cloth. She began to clean the tools, afraid she would make a mistake. But he didn't scold her when she moved too slow. He didn't raise his hand when she dropped one by accident. He simply picked it up, placed it back on the table, and returned to his work. The smallest smile touched her lips, though she quickly hid it. When the sun dipped low, they walked back to the house. Her legs ached from the long walk, but she didn't complain. The air was cool, and she found herself staring at the human's back as he walked ahead of her. Each step he took seemed to push the world away from her, creating a path where she could walk without fear. That night, he gave her food again, a little more than before. After eating, she curled up in her blanket near the fire. The human sat at the table, sharpening his blade in silence. She watched him, her eyes heavy with sleep. She wanted to ask again why he had chosen her, why he had raised his hand when everyone else laughed. But her voice failed, and soon her eyes closed. In her dreams, she saw the marketplace again. She saw the crowd laughing, the auctioneer shouting, the cage around her shaking. But then she saw his hand, steady in the air, never lowering. The laughter faded, replaced by silence, replaced by hope. For the first time, her dream did not end in darkness. It ended in light, in warmth, in the image of a man who didn't give up on her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt something new inside her chest. It was small, fragile, but alive. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was worth something after all. The night was quiet in the small stone house, but outside, the colony was alive with whispers. News had traveled fast. Everyone was talking about the foolish human who had bought the worthless alien girl. In the drinking halls, they laughed and made jokes. In the markets, traders shook their heads and called him mad. Some even said he had broken tradition by giving value to something that should have been discarded. The girl heard these whispers when she went with him to fetch water or when she followed him through the streets. People pointed at her, laughed under their breath, or sometimes said cruel words loud enough for her to hear. She lowered her head, pulling the cloak around her small frame, but the words still pierced her heart. Every laugh reminded her of the cage, of the day when no one had raised a hand, except him. One evening, as the human worked at his bench sharpening a long piece of metal, she sat quietly by the fire, hugging her knees. She could not stay silent any longer. "They are talking about us," she whispered. Her voice shook. "They say you are foolish. They say I am useless. They will not stop." The human did not lift his head. The sound of the blade against stone filled the room. After a moment, he said calmly, "Let them talk." She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. "They will come. They will try to take me back. I heard them. I heard them saying, 'You cannot protect me.' They will laugh at you until you give me away. That is how it always happens. Always." This time he looked at her. His eyes were calm but hard, steady like iron. "No one will take you," he said. His voice was simple, but it carried a weight she had never heard before. She shook her head quickly. "You don't understand. They will come when you sleep. They will hurt you, and they will drag me back. Please?" Her voice broke, and she pressed her face into her hands. "Please send me away before it happens. I don't want you to suffer because of me." The human set the blade down on the table and leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, the room was filled only with the crackle of the fire. Then he stood and walked to her. She flinched when he crouched down, expecting anger. Instead, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You are not leaving," he said. His words were firm, like a stone placed on the ground that no storm could move. She lifted her face, her eyes wet, her mouth trembling. "Why? Why would you risk yourself for me? I am nothing. I am broken." He didn't answer with long words. He only said, "Because no one else would." The firelight glowed on his face, casting shadows that made his eyes look deeper, stronger. She stared at him, searching for any sign of weakness, any hint that his promise would break like all the others she had known. But there was none. His gaze did not shift, his hand did not shake. That night, as the wind howled outside, she lay awake under the blanket, listening. Every sound made her heart race. The rustle of leaves, the crack of wood, the distant laughter of drunken voices. She waited for the door to burst open, for hands to drag her out, for the laughter to return. But nothing happened. The human sat awake at the table, polishing his blade, watching the door like a silent guard. He did not sleep until the fire turned to ash. The days passed, and the whispers grew louder. A group of men cornered the human in the market one afternoon. The girl hid behind him, her small body trembling. One of the men sneered, "Give her up, human. She is worthless. You are making a fool of yourself." Another leaned closer. "You think you can change what she is? You cannot. Send her back and save yourself." The human stood tall, his shoulders straight. His voice was calm but sharp. "She is mine. You will not touch her." The men laughed and spat at the ground. "Then you will suffer with her," one threatened before turning away. The girl clutched his sleeve, her heart pounding. She whispered, "You should have let me go. Now they will hate you." But he only said, "Let them hate." That night, she sat by the fire again, staring at the flames. Something inside her began to change. For the first time in her life, someone was standing for her. Not for money, not for power, not for amusement, just for her. He could have walked away at any moment, yet he stayed. She thought about the cage, about the raised hand, about the laughter that had filled the market. And she thought about his promise, his calm voice, his steady eyes. Slowly, trust began to grow in her heart, fragile but real. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and whispered softly, almost too quiet for him to hear, "Thank you." The human didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence was stronger than any word. He kept sharpening his blade, watching the door, making sure no one would ever take her again. For the first time, she fell asleep without fear of chains. And though the whispers outside still grew like shadows, inside that small stone house, a bond was forming, one that no laughter, no threat, and no cruelty could break. The night was calm, and the sky above the colony was filled with pale stars. The human had finished his work and was sitting near the fire, his blade resting on the table. The girl lay wrapped in her blanket, but her eyes were open. She could not sleep. Every whisper she had heard in the streets played in her mind, threats, laughter, and mocking voices. She thought of the men who had cornered him in the market. They had promised trouble, and she believed them. Her small body shivered at the thought of strangers breaking the door down. The sound came suddenly, distant screams, the crack of fire, the heavy echo of boots on stone. Her eyes widened as the noise spread through the colony like a wave. She sat up quickly, her chest tight with fear. The human stood at once, his face calm but sharp. He walked to the door, pulled it open, and looked out. The glow of flames lit the sky in the distance. Shadows ran across the streets. The colony was under attack. "Stay inside," he said. His voice was steady, but his hand reached for the blade he had sharpened so many nights before. The girl's small hands clutched the blanket. Her body trembled. "They will kill us," she whispered. Her voice cracked with terror. He turned his head toward her, his eyes meeting hers for only a second. "Not if I stand." Before she could speak again, the roar of raiders filled the air. Strange armored figures burst through the streets, carrying weapons that glowed with cruel light. Houses were set on fire, and people ran screaming in every direction. The human stepped outside, his blade ready, his body strong. He did not run. He stood in the center of the road as the first raider came charging toward him. The girl gasped and covered her mouth. She wanted to hide, but her eyes would not leave him. The raider swung a weapon at his head. The human ducked low, his blade flashing upward. Sparks flew as metal struck metal. He twisted his body, kicked the raider's legs out from under him, and finished the fight with one strike. Another raider came, then another. They surrounded him, their glowing weapons flashing in the firelight. But he fought with everything he had. His arms swung steady, his steps firm, his strikes sharp and full of power. Each time one fell, another came forward. He didn't hesitate. He didn't turn his back. He fought like a wall standing against a flood. Inside the house, the girl crouched low, her heart pounding. She wanted to close her eyes, but something inside her refused. She watched him through the crack in the doorway. She had never seen anyone fight for her before. People had always thrown her aside, called her worthless, left her to suffer. But this human, he faced danger without fear. He chose to stand between her and death. Her chest ached, not from fear this time, but from something else. She pressed her hands against her heart. Why would he risk his life for her? Why would he fight so hard when she had nothing to give in return? A loud crash shook the walls. One raider broke into the house, his mask glowing with red light. The girl screamed, stumbling back, but before the raider could grab her, the human stormed in. His blade cut across the air, striking the attacker down before he reached her. He stood between her and the body, breathing hard, sweat running down his face. His clothes were torn, his arms cut, but his grip on the blade was still strong. "Stay behind me," he said again, his voice like iron. She nodded quickly, tears filling her eyes. Her tiny hands grabbed the back of his shirt. She followed him as he moved through the burning streets, never letting go. He struck down anyone who came too close, shielding her with his body. Flames lit his face, and each swing of his blade burned into her memory. The colony was chaos. Fires raged, buildings collapsed, and raiders shouted orders. But wherever the human walked, he carved a path, not for himself, but for her. People hiding in the shadows stared in shock. Some whispered, "That's him, the fool who bought the worthless girl." But their voices changed as they watched. They saw him fighting with everything he had, carrying the girl close, never letting her fall. The girl's fear began to shift. It was still there, but it mixed with something new: pride. She was no longer just a weak creature in a cage. She was someone worth fighting for, because he made it so. As the night dragged on, the raiders finally began to retreat, leaving smoke and ashes behind. The colony was broken, but alive. The human stood in the middle of the street, his blade heavy in his hand, his chest rising and falling with each breath. The girl clung to him, her face pressed into his back, her small body trembling but safe. Slowly, silence returned. The fires still burned, but the screams faded. Survivors crawled from hiding, staring at the human. None of them laughed now. None of them mocked. Their eyes were wide with something else: respect and perhaps fear. The girl lifted her face and looked around. No one dared to speak against him. The one man they had called a fool was the only one who had stood tall when the raiders came. Her lips trembled as she whispered into the night, too soft for anyone but him to hear. "You didn't just buy me, you saved me." The human didn't answer. He only stood there, his shoulders heavy, his blade dripping with the proof of his fight. But his silence spoke louder than any words. The girl's heart burned with a new feeling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't ashamed of who she was. For the first time, she wanted to be more than the broken thing everyone had laughed at. She wanted to stand beside him, just as he had stood for her. That night, under the glow of burning houses, the colony saw the truth. The tiny girl was no longer just a piece of trash sold at an auction. She was the one he had chosen to protect, the one who mattered enough for him to fight against the darkness, and no laughter could erase that. The smoke of the raid still hung over the colony the next morning. Broken stalls lined the streets, walls were blackened with fire, and the air smelled of ash. People whispered as they cleaned the damage, their eyes sometimes drifting to the human who walked with quiet steps, the small alien girl close at his side. No one laughed at her now, but the whispers carried a new sound: fear, curiosity, and hunger. Some had seen the way one raider shouted when he recognized her. His words had spread like fire. She was not worthless. She was rare. The girl felt it too. When she walked, she felt eyes following her. People who once mocked her now stared at her with greed. She pulled her cloak tightly around her shoulders and whispered to the human as they passed through the street. They know something." He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed forward, steady as always. "Ignore them," he said, but his voice was heavier now, carrying a weight she could hear. Later that day, as they worked in the workshop, the memory of the raider's words returned again and again in her mind. She could still hear him shouting above the fire and the chaos. She is not worthless. She is rare. She didn't understand what it meant. She had never been rare, never been special. She had only been the small one, the weak one, the one left behind. She gripped the edge of the work table and asked in a trembling voice, "What did he mean?" The human set down the tool in his hand and looked at her. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he asked, "Do you want the truth?" Her heart raced, but she nodded. He sighed, leaning back. "You're kind. They are not like the others. You are small, yes, but inside you is something different. Power. It sleeps until you trust someone. That is why they mocked you, because you never had a chance to trust. Without trust, the power never wakes." Her lips parted in shock. She shook her head quickly. "No, that cannot be. I have nothing. I am nothing." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Then why did they want you back so badly? Why did they fight so hard to take you?" "They knew the truth." Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. She thought about the way the raiders had turned desperate the moment her name was shouted. They had stopped laughing then. They had looked at her like treasure. She hugged her arms around herself, whispering, "If that is true, then I am in danger. They will never stop." The human stood, his tall figure blocking the light from the door. His voice was steady, unshaken. "Then we make them stop." That night, her sleep was restless. She dreamed of cages and fire, of laughter turning into shouts, of glowing eyes staring at her with hunger. She woke in the dark, her body shaking. The fire had gone low, but the human was still awake, sitting at the table, sharpening his blade again. The sound of metal on stone calmed her heart. She realized he had been awake most nights since he bought her. He was always watching, always guarding. She whispered softly, "Why do you not rest?" Without looking up, he answered, "Because they will come, and I will be ready." She hugged the blanket close, her throat tight with emotion. His voice held no doubt, no hesitation. For him, protecting her was not a choice. It was something he had already decided. The next day, trouble arrived. A group of strangers came to the colony, their clothes richer than the common traders. They carried long staffs, their eyes sharp as knives. People cleared the street for them, whispering. The girl hid behind the human, her small hands clutching his sleeve. One of the strangers stepped forward, his lips curling into a thin smile. "We heard you bought something that does not belong to you," he said, his eyes sliding to the girl. "Hand her over, human. You do not know what you hold." The crowd gathered around, waiting. Some whispered eagerly, hoping the human would give her up, afraid of what the strangers might do if he refused. The human's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "She belongs to no one but herself." The stranger's smile faded. His voice grew cold. "You don't understand. Her kind is not meant for you. She is valuable, dangerous. If you keep her, you will bring ruin upon yourself." The girl trembled, her head lowering. She whispered, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I should go." The human turned his head just enough to look at her. His eyes were steady, like iron, and his words were sharp. "No, you stay." The stranger's face twisted with anger. "Then you choose death." The human raised his blade, the metal catching the light. The crowd gasped, stepping back. The girl's heart pounded as the strangers spread out, ready to strike. But before they could, something inside her shifted. She felt a warmth rising in her chest, spreading through her small body. Her fear did not vanish, but it changed into something else. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but stronger than before. "I will not go with you." The strangers froze, their eyes wide. They had expected weakness, silence, and shame. Instead, they saw the first spark of power. The human placed his hand gently on her shoulder, his voice low. "Then we stand together." The crowd that once laughed at her now stared in silence. The girl, once mocked and called worthless, now stood beside the human like a flame refusing to die. The whispers changed again, not of laughter this time, but of awe. She didn't know what her power truly was, or how far it could go. But she knew one thing with certainty. She was not alone anymore. And as long as the human's hand stayed steady, as long as he stood beside her, she would no longer be afraid of the truth. For the first time in her life, she believed that she was not worthless. She was something more. The night air was heavy with smoke, and silence hung over the colony after the strangers left in anger. The human closed the door of his small house and set his blade on the table. The girl sat near the fire, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes wide with thoughts she could not speak. She had felt something awaken inside her when she stood against the strangers, a warmth that spread through her body, a strength she had never known. But it frightened her. She did not understand what it meant, and she feared it would bring more danger. The human sat across from her, his face calm, though lines of weariness showed near his eyes. He said nothing, only watched the fire crackle. Finally, she broke the silence. "They will come again, more of them, stronger ones. You cannot fight them all." Her voice trembled, but there was a small edge of defiance too. He leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "I don't care how many come. My hand went up that day. I will never lower it." Her lips parted, his words echoed in her chest like a drumbeat. That single hand in the marketplace had changed everything. It had begun as a simple act, one raised arm against a sea of laughter, but it had grown into something far greater. Now it was a shield that stood between her and the world. The days that followed were tense. Raiders no longer attacked openly, but eyes watched from the shadows. Merchants and strangers whispered as she walked through the streets. Some wanted her captured, some wanted her sold again, but no one dared act while the human was near. His presence had become a wall no one wanted to climb. But the girl felt the pressure building. Each night, she dreamed of chains and cages, of greedy hands reaching for her. She woke with sweat on her face, clutching her blanket tightly. Yet each time, she saw him awake, sharpening his blade, his back straight, his eyes calm. His silence gave her courage. One evening, when the sun set in fire-colored streaks, a group of raiders returned. This time, they did not come with fire or shouting. They came in silence, their numbers hidden in the shadows. The colony trembled as they spread across the streets. People hid in their houses, doors shut tight, afraid to even breathe. The girl stood near the doorway of the house, her hands gripping the wood. She could feel it coming, like a storm pressing down on her chest. "They're here," she whispered. The human strapped his blade to his back and walked out into the night. She followed him, her small steps quick, her cloak fluttering behind her. The raiders stepped forward, their leader raising his voice so the whole colony could hear. "Hand over the girl. She is ours by right. Refuse, and we will burn this place to ashes." The crowd of colonists peeked from their windows, fear in their eyes. Many of them prayed he would surrender her, just to save the colony from ruin. The girl felt her heart sink. She knew what everyone expected. She turned to the human, whispering with trembling lips, "Maybe I should go. If I leave, they won't hurt you. They won't hurt anyone else." He looked at her, his face hard as stone. "No, you are not theirs. You will never be theirs." Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe, but fear pressed down heavy. The raiders drew their weapons, the glow of their blades lighting up the night. The leader laughed cruelly. "Then you die with her." The human stepped forward, his blade shining in the firelight. The girl grabbed his sleeve, desperate. "Please, they are too many." He turned his head slightly toward her. "Did you not feel it before? The warmth inside you? Trust it." Her breath caught. His words unlocked something deep within her, something she'd been pushing away. She closed her eyes, her tiny body trembling. And then it came, the warmth, the light, rising from her chest, flowing through her veins. She opened her eyes, and they glowed faintly, shining in the dark. The raiders froze, murmurs spread through their ranks. They had expected weakness, not power. The leader snarled, but his voice shook. "So it's true." The human raised his blade high, standing tall beside her. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice sharp as steel. The fight began. Raiders charged, their glowing weapons flashing. The human met them head on, striking with the strength of a man who had nothing to lose but everything to protect. His blade cut through the night, his steps firm and unshaken. The girl stood behind him, her hands raised without knowing how. Light spread from her palms, forming a faint shield that pushed back the closest attackers. The colonists gasped from their windows as they watched. The girl they had once laughed at, once mocked as worthless, now stood glowing with strange power. And the human who had been called a fool fought like a warrior who could not fall. Together, they forced the raiders back step by step until the night echoed with their cries of retreat. When the last enemy fled into the dark, silence fell over the colony. Smoke and dust hung in the air, but the fires had gone out. The human lowered his blade, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The girl staggered, weak from the effort, and he caught her before she fell. She looked up at him, her small face pale but filled with something new. "You never put your hand down," she whispered. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying in the quiet night. "So I will never let go." He held her close, his steady eyes shining with pride. Around them, the colonists stepped out from hiding, their faces filled with awe. No one laughed now. No one dared to call her worthless. They had seen her power. They had seen his courage. Together, they were something no one could ignore. The girl buried her face against his chest, her tears hot against his worn clothes. For the first time in her life, she felt not only safe but alive. And in that moment, she knew her future was no longer a cage, no longer shame. It was a path walked side by side with the one who had raised his hand for her and never let it fall.